Welcome to the Moulding Health Show. Our goal is to leverage the wisdom and experience of healthcare practitioners to set you on a path of self-discovery and healing. These insights, coupled with a multidisciplinary approach to each area of interest, should provide an invaluable resource to everyone looking for a better approach to health. In this episode of the show, we speak to Adilia Silva about eating disorders from a clinical psychologist perspective. Adilia Silva, welcome to the show. So we're really glad to have you on board. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So we're talking about, you're so welcome. I mean, it's always amazing, having people like you on board, and also being quite, passionate about the topics we're talking about. And I think for today's one, I'm really interested in it because my wife actually worked with eating disorders. So we're talking about eating disorders from a clinical psychologist perspective and really unpacking that because, before I met Ingrid, I didn't even know what an eating disorder is. But apparently it's a big thing. So maybe take us through, why do you work with people with eating disorders? And maybe also just telling us what it is.
Okay, so look, I'm quite passionate about it. I've published in it. I've got a book coming out on it. For me, it's so ingrained in our society that we don't even see eating disorders anymore. So if you look at the models, they're all very skinny. And you think, oh, that's the normal. Well, actually, they're anorexic because they are so skinny. So the ones where you can see their bones and all of that, yes, I'm not taking away that, in the last few years, they've done a lot in terms of telling the youth it's photoshopped. It's not the normal, it's all of that kind of thing, but it's still there, it's still permanent. And it goes from a wide range. So from anorexia, where it's just too skinny, to bulimia, where it's you eating, but to maintain your weight, you're purging in one way or another, to binge eating, where you can't handle your emotions or whatever it is, and you just eat. You eat an extraordinary amount of food in a small amount of time. And that is what eating disorders are. So it's this vast range. And then it doesn't have to be pathological. So it doesn't have to be diagnosable to have an eating disorder. We all go through it. We all go through the times where we don't want to eat or we overeat. So we all have this. And for me, what's important is the healthy relationship with food. So food isn't your enemy. It's always there. And we can't go like addicts, oh, you can't have it. You have to have it. You need to live. So we have to have a healthy relationship with food. And being from a Portuguese background, I know how food is always there. You sad, eat. You happy, eat. And it's all of this kind of thing. So that's why eating disorders for me is such a big thing. It's prevalent all over the place, and we don't even realize it. So,
and I think Adilia, from a there's such a fine balance. But as you said, you mentioned Portuguese background. I think it's the same with us, from an Indian background. But you can't go to someone's house without eating. It's like almost disrespectful, in a way. And so food, with our culture is like so intertwined. And I can't imagine what these patients must be going through in terms of that dilemma, even within themselves, to be able to say, actually, I don't want to eat, or I can't eat, or stuff like that. And I think, what I want to say is there must be that fine balance between not getting it right and getting it right. Do you see that as well?
Very much so. So what I see with the ones that we can diagnose as eating disorder, at the bottom, at the end of the day, it's about perfectionism and anxiety. So I can't control anything else in my life. I can control food. And if I can't control the food, I'm going to purge it. So it's those kind of things. And it's a lot of them. This is the challenge working with people with eating disorders, that they don't see the problem. What problem? I don't have a problem. I'm doing well with food. I'm controlling my food. I'm having small portions. It's fine. There's no problem. It's what is healthy. And they don't realize how fine that line is. And they go to someone's house, and yes, in our cultures, you go to someone's house and you don't have food, you are being disrespectful. They don't see it. They're seeing it, well, I'm still having this little piece, so I'm still being respectful. But they don't realize how little it is. Usually the binging, it happens in secret. So I'm not talking so much about the binging in that respect, because it happens in secret. It's very rare that someone will binge in front of someone else, just out the bat. It's very rare. So that's why it's usually that control that they keep. And that's why I'm talking more about the anorexic in that respect. But yes, it's very much fine line.
And do
Yes.
you find there's a certain time when that develops? I mean, I know so our little girl, I mean, she's, just become a teenager. And so we're always like very conscious of that, So, and fortunately, I mean, the schools that she's been to, I mean, they've been talking about body image and stuff like that. So there's that sense of awareness of it, which I think we growing up, I mean, I think kids could be quite nasty about that stuff, especially if someone is slightly overweight or things like that. I can just imagine, that becoming a problem. But and not to preempt it, but do you find that there's a certain age that this starts occurring?
Well, based on my research, it's usually during the teenage years. So all the research I've read is teenage years. In my practice, I've noticed that, but I've also noticed adults coming with it. So now the modern thing is before it used to be teenage girls. You started it there. Now we're getting more adult, and now it's men as well. And with men, it's the whole body image, but in the other way. So they take it has to be this kind of shape. So I need to go to the gym, I have to have the V, all of those kind of things in the opposite way. So they take it to the extreme.
I can see that, hey, and that's why I'm saying, it's such a fine, margin, because I worked in corporate for many years. I don't anymore, but and you would always have these, certain team members that would, almost brag about the fact that they spend 3 hours in the morning riding or running. And I just think it was almost like, and for me, I mean, especially because we had a young family, it was almost impossible to carve out an hour, sometimes 2 hours. And I would always think, how do you find this time? But it's something about that, it's almost like that fanatical. I'm not saying they had an eating disorder, but I'm just, making the point that, I think there's almost this fanatical part to it that you almost have to be aware of, because when is enough? Because most of the medical aids tell us, 20 minutes per day or 30 minutes per day should be enough. So what would cause someone to spend 3 hours? Is there an increased enjoyment? Is there something that they want to get from that? So, yeah, I think it always interested me, when did you cross that line? But do you find that, so for instance, with teenagers, and I always want to keep it actionable as well, the content that we put out. So with a teenager, is there certain things that someone, people that they love around them would be watching out for? Yes.
So body image is the big thing. Keep reinforcing the photoshopping. Keep looking at who they're having as idols. And kind of say, and then your own body structure. So with the girls that I have in my practice, I'm always telling them, you're not going to have this perfect body. Your genetic makeup is going to tell you if you're going to have abs, for example, or not, or great legs or not. So you always have to keep it reality check. So that's the first thing. I call it the reality check. Be real. And then with parents, have those conversations. Talk about food. Get people involved. So if you need to get a dietitian or a nutritionist involved, get them involved and involved in healthy eating, a good relationship with food. Don't give up your pizza if you really want that pizza. But then just make sure during that day you're going to have healthy vegetables. If you don't like spinach, you don't have to have your spinach. But look at what spinach gives you and have alternatives. So it's all about that healthy relationship. And then model. And that's the big thing parents don't realize enough about is modeling. So the whole teenage thing, do as I say, not as I do, that whole thing. Little do you know that your kids are actually doing what you do. So if you're an exercise fanatic like you've just described to me, those guys that are 3 hours in the gym, what are you telling your kid? Your body is important. Nothing else is important except your body. You have to make 3 hours a day for your body. So those kind of things. So having a balanced outlook on exercise, on food, all of those kind of things shows your kid what to do.
Mm. I like, and you use the word there, and I think it's such a it's such an important one. I think throughout life, though, but that balance. Sometimes you are going to go for a wedding, and yes, you're going to eat the food, but that's just one meal, and I think people, they almost like go these extremes where I don't eat this and that's it. And I think for me, it's always been that how do you have that balance? So yes, I know it was one bad meal, but then, as you said, the next meal maybe cover up with the veggies or something else, or maybe a lighter meal. And I think if we can train children on how to see that, and just having that balance with everything, whether that's exercise, whether that's live, whether that's watching TV, and especially in view of this topic, especially when it comes to food, I think there's something about that. I mean, we live in a day and age as well, and I don't know who I was telling this to, but I don't. Many years ago there was always these cigarette ads on TV, and like for instance, I remember the Peter Stuyvesant ads. It was always with these glamorous people, like with a cigarette in their hands. You don't see many of those anymore. But do you find like with body image, is it certain things that kind of come up with your clients that they almost gravitate towards? I mean, where do they find this? I mean, is it like an Instagram kind of thing, with the model, well, not even models, but more celebrities, I suppose, hey? And that they follow.
Thing is, it's not so much the celebrities, because they kind of they go, okay, that is not attainable, but it is Instagram. So I'm seeing a lot with the teen girls. It is Instagram, and it's these people that portray themselves as healthy, but yet you can see ribs. And they're saying, oh, I've got this vegan book that's coming out, and this is my lifestyle, and this is the exercise I do, and look at how great I look. And you almost want to say, well, look at that person. How do they actually look? They're way too thin. What they're portraying in terms of what they're eating, for example, with the whole vegetarian thing, there's not enough protein in their diets. But they are pushing these diets as these are healthy. Yeah, but there's not enough protein. And then the girls say to me, but I want to be toned. And I go, and you're following this diet, but there's not enough protein for you to be toned. There's no way you're gaining muscle. There's nothing there. And it comes back to that balance. So there's nothing being wrong with being vegan, vegetarian, or a meat eater, but it comes down to balance. Looking at who you're following on Instagram, whoever, and going, okay, really look at this person. Is this person really healthy? Yeah. And then with filters and everything nowadays that people are taking photos with, yes, it's not photoshopped, but it's filtered out the wazoo. So what is real in all of that? You don't know.
And some of the apps, I mean, I know we were having fun the one time. I think it was I think it was our daughter's birthday, and one of the family members was showing us on Snapchat. And, there's all of these filters that make people look different, like skinny, like all of those things. And I thought, wow, it's amazing that even within the apps, they build in these filters, that make you look in a different way. And that can't, I mean, that's obviously not natural, and there's a coolness aspect to it, but I can just imagine how, if someone was really fanatical about this, how they would almost be able to trick the system to make it seem as if they were not that person. So yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned that. The other one that I took a lot of it was quite an eye opener for me, was when you listen to actors, talking about movies, and like I watched one recently with Jake Gyllenhaal, I think, and it was about him being a boxer. I can't remember the name of the movie. I think it was Southpaw, and they were asking him, how did you become like the physique, have this physique of a boxer? And he said, I trained for like 6 hours a day, and I had a personal trainer, and I had this person and that person. And at the end, he said, they asked him, so did you keep the physique after that? And his comment was something to the effect of not a chance. I went back to just eating whatever I wanted, just because that lifestyle is like so hectic to be able to to maintain that image and that body. So I thought that was like pretty real, as in, how if you wanted that, the amount of effort and the amount of, yeah, that you have to put in just to do that. So I think with your clients as well, I mean, I think, the more we have the conversation around, like if you wanted that, how much off balance that is in terms of that.
So
Do you
just to make
agree?
it even more real for you, sorry,
Mm,
just to make it even more real for you, the whole keto banting
mm,
thing that's on, that is not, you can't prescribe to that long term because you just can't live with that. So similar to the actors in the movies, they train stupid amounts and they're eating all of this amount. It's not, you can't keep it long term. And the keto diet and all of that, it's the same thing. So I always say to people, don't look at diets, look at balance. And it's the same thing. I mean, who's got time working, family, and working out 6 hours a day and watching your meals? That's not long
mm.
term. You can't do that.
Yeah, I agree. I agree 100%. I mean, I think that's the part. And I think, I'm all for like, good nutrition. But you're completely right. You mentioned all of these diets and, the vegetarian movement, the vegan movement. And it almost, in some cases, and again, this is more my opinion of it, it almost becomes like a fad or something people could be proud of, like, and rather than is it the most effective thing for your body right now? And I think that's the part, I think, and obviously there's a whole bunch of social consciousness about, like, being better for the planet, discounting all of those facts. I think there's certain things that I think people do, and it's more for, um, yeah, maybe for the image, so it's interesting that we're talking about body image, because I think it's maybe even social image, like you want to portray yourself in a certain way, you want to be that person that goes to gym 3 hours a day because you fit better in a team. That's what I found at some point as well, in corporate it became the cool thing to do cycling, or like registering for 94.7, and if you didn't, then it was like, why aren't you doing that? um yeah, so interesting, with that. Do you find is depression part of it, or does depression come after it? I mean, in terms of an eating disorder.
And that's the difficult part. It's almost like you're asking me what came first, the chicken or the egg.
Mm,
It's difficult. In individuals, I can say one came before the other. In other individuals, it's the other before the other, and in some, it's at the same time.
mm,
And that's actually where I was. I mean, we've been speaking about body image, the social aspects, but the psychological, and that's where my work primarily comes in. Is the psychological aspect. So, was it the depression? Um, so, what caused the depression that then caused the eating disorder? Or was it the eating disorder that came first and then it spiraled into the depression? Usually, with eating disorders and also with depression, it's so complex that it's a whole host of things. So, it could be a trauma, it could be a stressor, um, it could be their own personality setup, their own vulnerabilities. Um, so I could go on and on and on. And there's so many things. It's almost, again, was it the chicken or was it the egg that came first?
mm, yeah, and then I suppose, I mean, yeah, it's a null and void question from the perspective of the person still has the eating disorder, but the reason for asking it was like, I'm always interested to see what the markers are, especially from a parent point of view, from a loved one perspective, so if you see someone going through that aspect. I know for us, like, and again, because we've got a teenage daughter, people always said, like, you have to watch the body image stuff. As soon as that becomes an issue, then actually, like, do I need to just pay a little bit more attention? And I think that's the thing that most people forget. And I think for me as well, because I didn't know about eating disorders growing up, I think we heard the term, once or twice, but I never knew how that was, how severe it could be until, obviously Ingrid started working with eating disordered patients at Tara Hospital in Johannesburg, and they had a whole unit on it. And I mean, I was quite fascinated about how they controlled the diet, they had the therapy sessions, and still it seemed like the prognosis, especially if someone was quite into the well into the condition, it was still very difficult to get them out of that. Do you find the same as well? I mean, is there a good prognosis for eating disorder patients?
There's only a good prognosis if they recognize that they've got an illness. If they don't, there isn't a prognosis, because no matter what you hit at them, they will not want to change because they don't see themselves as being disordered or having an illness or anything. It's the same thing with the addict. The addict will not change until they are ready to. And with eating disorders, it's the same thing. And you see it throughout life. So for me, eating disorders for life, because they will always, whenever there's something that stresses them out in their lives, they go back to the behaviors when they were having eating disorder, because that's the default.
That actually makes a lot of sense. And I think it's the small things that we do to reinforce that idea as well. So if someone lost weight, you tell them they're actually looking really good at the moment, and it kind of reinforces that behavior that, okay, cool, like that's how I get that. So, I mean, whereas it could be quite sad. I mean, I remember I was working on a presentation for my wife the one time. She was part of this business network group, and we were putting these pictures together, where you can clearly see, the person has problems. I mean, where you can see the ribs, when you can see the, the bone structure on the hands and the legs, but it's almost like they can't see that. They still think it looks amazing, which is incredible,
Yes.
to see.
And they actually tell, and I mean, I get a lot of them saying they do that or on their arms. As long as I can do that, I know I'm fine. And but that's not normal. But I know I'm fine because of the insecurities underlying that, the lack of control. And based on my own research that I did, the personality structure. So the striving for perfectionism. So usually you get the overachievers. So we just had our matric results coming out now. These people with 10 distinctions and all of these things. I'm going, okay, that's great, fantastic. I'm so proud of them. But what's underlying all of that? So with some of them, I think, is there an eating disorder somewhere there?
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that gives me goosebumps just thinking about it, because, like obviously we've been through matric. I mean, you have multiple degrees, so we all know how much of an effort it is, to get qualifications, right? And when I see someone with a 95.6%, pass rate in matric, I always think, what effort did it take, for that person to do that? And then we look at from a media point of view and a parent's point of view, where they portray these children, at that level, and this person did so amazing. I just think even that, like what you spoke about with body image, and isn't that the same thing? Where you're propping up that, and you're almost like setting the person up for that is the level that you need to be in. But no one, like as adults in corporate, in your private practice, in life, you never perform at that level.
No. Well, I actually say in my practice, no one cares about my matric results anymore. It doesn't come up. So you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself. You are outperforming yourself, but matric results don't come up again. Yes, it's a good and important milestone, but there's so much else in life, so many other milestones that you need to go through, and that you need to learn how to have a balanced performance level. So performing at the top, especially under COVID times, you're looking at burnout. You don't have where you pay attention to you, and that psychological aspect. And that's why I said I always question, because to me it's like, what are you negating about yourself? So you're performing so highly academically, but what have you negated about yourself? What haven't you looked at? What other aspects are just not there? So a lot of these matriculants, they don't have a social life. or you ask them to do anything around the house in terms of chores or partaking in the family structure, and they go, "What are you talking about? I don't know."
Mm.
So, and that to me, I question, how functional are they?
Yeah. And someone told me, I think when I was still consulting, he said, the correlation between matric results, the only correlation was on university and, entrance. So, like if you had good matric results, it meant that there was a likelihood that you were going to go and get a degree, as an example. But that was the only correlation. And there was no correlation between a 95 or an 81, or, a 95 and a 75. And that was interesting, because I think we put this pressure on the children as well, to be, like, I need to get 9 A's. And, like for me, it's like even that, I mean, if you already got in, well, and I suppose, I could speak under correction, maybe to get into a specialist program like actuarial science or medicine, maybe you need 9 distinctions. But yeah, I mean, like as you said, and the trade-off, what's the trade-off to that? And I think that's an interesting thing, even from a parent's point of view. Putting that pressure on children to be able to always perform at that level. Again, like you said, like it's the modeling part, because what are you saying for the rest of their lives? Do they have to be at that level all the time? When do they relax? Do they relax when they got their degree? Do they relax when they got their job? Like when exactly do they take their foot off the gas? Do you have any thoughts around that, in terms of that expectation, of them at a high level all the time?
For me, it's don't expect high level, expect their best. So as long as they're doing their best, that's the important. And also speak to the child and talk to them about their talents. So not everyone is academically strong. Not everyone is good at sports. But look at their talents. What are they good at? And then ask them to do their best in their talents. And as parents, you need to do the same thing. So with COVID and everyone working at home, people were on work mode, 18 hours a day and things like that. And they forgot, well, actually, they're at home. They also need to do home life. What was that modeling for the kids during that time? We need to work all the time because this is what life expects from us. So it's all of those kind of things that you quickly forget how much you're actually showing your child, but just your behaviors. Also, speak to the child about your own performance. So speak about how you did in matric. Please, if you failed matric, don't kind of post about that. Kind of put it in perspective. And that's why I always say in my practice, no one asks me about my matric marks now. It's null and void.
It's interesting as you say that, because it's been a point I've always thought about, is like, during school we almost like put so much pressure on children and even ourselves. I mean, to be able to perform at that level, and almost like when you start working, that level drops completely. I don't know if you notice that as well. Like you're not as difficult, with people once they start working. They're almost like they're adults now, so you don't have to have that pressure. But for some reason, when children are children at school, we have this like really high expectation, and it's always interested me, how that works. And even when it comes to deadlines, and that's the reason I mentioned that, when it comes to deadlines, yes, there's deadlines, but most of the time, as long as you could justify why the deadline is moving, most companies would be accepting of that. I mean, there's a few exceptions, you can't get it wrong, but most of the time it's like that. Whereas when it comes to all of the pressure we put on ourselves around academia and school, it seems to be that it's either you do this or life is going to end. It's like, it seems to be that constant, like, polar opposites.
Yes.
It's almost like the system is set up for failure, around that part. And but that's the beauty of having professionals like yourself that can help us navigate through that. Let's say, actually it's not the end of the world. Even matric, I mean, you can get another chance to do it, if you didn't get the results that you wanted to. Whereas yeah, like just having that expectation all the time. And I think that's the thing I want to bring up with this episode, is that, as you said, what is the trade-off, to that 95.4%? The trade-off is possibly this or that. And I think in this episode, we're highlighting one of the trade-offs for perfection and control is probably an eating disorder. And if you're not watching out for it, it's probably happening. And I think, it becomes worse when the child leaves home, because then, you're not seeing that. You're probably just going to see the effects. And I think, with in my wife's practice as well, she mentioned, sometimes she would have these family meetings. And when you mention to the family, actually, this person is actually this child or this young adult or is going through this, and, they're really struggling with it. The family is almost like shocked, as to how that could be happening. And it's interesting, how that works as well. It's almost like we're oblivious sometimes to that stuff. Do you find that as well in terms of,
Yes,
of family?
yes, and that's why with eating disorders, we always recommend that family therapy is also done, because with addicts, you can say to them, move away from your friendship group, move away from that environment. With eating disorders, you can't say no, pack up and never see your family again. And that's a lot of the things happen because of the family. So a lot of what you're seeing comes because of the family. So family therapy is important. Also to give awareness to the family, how the family functions. And also so they can become aware of their dysfunction. And that's what's scary. They don't realize it. Though they're functioning, everyone's performing well, everyone's doing well, but it's actually dysfunctional. So often you find that sometimes there's a parent that's not connecting with their emotions, and that's how they're showing their child. Don't connect with your emotions, control what you can. What's that? Food, exercise, and those kind of things. And they're out of the house, so there isn't a parent seeing how much they are eating, and then that exacerbates. It becomes worse. And it's all of those kind of things. So it's almost in family therapy, you need to see your own dysfunction to help the person who's got the eating disorder.
I like that. So for anyone that doesn't know what this is, and can you paint the picture a little bit in terms of what the person goes through? And specifically what I'm thinking about was, my wife would always mention that with eating disorder patients, for instance, because they because they throw up, the teeth actually becomes deteriorates. Do you find things like that? Maybe their arms are a lot more skinnier, so the bone density is lower. Can you take us through some of those things?
So for anorexia, it's bone density. So their bones actually become quite brittle. There's not enough fat in their bodies, so their nutrients aren't being taken up. So then you get heart disease and all internal organs that are destroyed. I'm not even saying damaged, I'm saying destroyed. There's also infertility. So for the girls, their menstruation stop. So there's infertility issues. So that's with anorexia. So death is something that happens because you actually die of malnutrition. And there has been many deaths. Okay. With bulimia, which is the purging. Now, the purging can happen one of two ways. It's either going to be laxatives or that they are going to the toilet and purging. Okay, so if it's the laxatives, they're taking too many laxatives, so that's destroying the whole intestine flora. And again, they're not taking enough nutrients, and then there's internal organ damage. For the ones that purge, that vomit, in other words, there's teeth damage. There's damage to their hands. There's damage that they do to their to their esophagus. There's a reflux that they're going to have to sit with for the rest of their lives. And then talking about reflux, binge eating, it's the same thing. Because they're eating so much amount of food in one go, their stomach, so there's a valve on top of the stomach that doesn't close anymore. So they get the reflux. And that's constant, and that's damaging. So with any of the eating disorders, there's very long-term, if not fatal, consequences.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. And the one that for me always stood out was when my wife would say that, they could go into cardiac arrest. And I thought, like, really? Because, like, again, that was my, my immaturity in terms of understanding the topic. But it's their body composition is so much so that they could actually die. And I think when you say that, then you realize that it's actually not just about body image, and it's not about just skipping a few meals and stuff like that. This is pretty serious. And if it goes unchecked for a long time, that's probably the hardcore prognosis. It could end up like that. And I think that's the reason also you want to catch it sooner, and you want to be aware, and everything, all the good stuff that you said so far, about having that balance and all of that stuff. That's what we need to be training children or loved ones around, that healthy balance. So I'm glad you painted that for us.
Thank you. And I just wanted to interrupt there in terms of it's not even long term. So I had a patient who was anorexic just for a year, and their bone density was already affected. It was 1 year. It's not long term. It was 1 year. Their bone density was so low that they actually had to stop practicing any sport because the bones were so brittle. So that's, when you said long term, I'm going, well, watch out. It's not even long term. Okay, in that case, it didn't go fatal, but it could have. And again, I'm going to repeat, it was 1 year.
That's actually quite sobering as well. And do you find, the other thing I heard about was the fact that they have almost a fascination with exercise as well. So, like you would think, like you're not eating enough, so you would think that you don't want to exercise, but there's this opposite effect. Is that true?
Yes. So they're not eating and they want to over-exercise because they need to lose that weight. It's the control. Also, and for me, and no one's ever said this to me, but for me, it's a distractor. So anorexics do feel hunger. No matter what people say to you, they do feel hunger. So how do you distract your hunger? You get busy. So how do you get busy? You exercise. You outperform. So you academically, whatever it is. So you get distracted. So that you don't feel hunger.
Yeah, it's kind of, it seems obvious when you say that, because everyone, are humans, and like the same hunger pains that I would get, everyone else would get. But yeah, it just doesn't seem like it's like it happens. And I think for me, the exercise was quite sobering, when I thought of it, and to the point where my wife would say, like, they would have like a jacket on and then exercise. You normally do that in extreme cases when you really want to lose a lot of weight. The boxers like do that, but it's at that level of of perfection or drive around it, which I thought was incredible. And then if you think of the whole cardiac arrest aspect, I'm thinking that's just a recipe for disaster. Doing that. Sorry, I was going to ask, how does someone seek out therapy firstly, and what can they almost expect by working with someone like yourself, as a clinical psychologist?
So generally, as I said, because people with eating disorders don't realize that they've got an eating disorder, they don't come to me out of their own free will. Usually it's a parent that contacts me and goes, I'm worried. So it's usually that route. There's a few that do come to me out of their own free will, but they've already been in therapy before. They've already been through programs, Tara, all of those kind of things. So yeah, that's the first thing. And then if there is obviously financial availability for them, so if they're financially well, then I always recommend an MDT, so a multi-disciplinary team, where you've got a dietitian, you've got a psychiatrist, you've got all of these professionals working with you. Because it's, as you heard, it's so multifaceted that you need multiple professionals working with you. If there isn't that, then I sort of take on the role a little bit of everyone. So I try to do a little bit of nutritional help in terms of you need protein balance, that kind of thing. I can't give them the specifics because I'm not trained in that way. But then I do ask them, please do send me photos so that I know you're having enough food. Then I get the buy-in of the parents. So if I'm working alone, I get the parents to help me. So I get the parents to say, please just check that they are eating. So they're not just sending me the photos. Please check that they're not over-exercising. I can't do that. I'm not doing the BMI. I'm not checking all of that kind of stuff. So it's that way. And then the way I work with them is that I work with not an eating disorder, I work with the whole person. Because this disorder is about the whole person. So in my way of working, I always work with the entire person. I address what's going on in their lives, every aspect. So not just the eating disorder. And generally, if they don't recognize that they have an eating disorder, I go at it in a different level. So I don't make them admit that they've got an eating disorder and this is what we need to do. I usually get their buy-in. So yeah, I think I summarized enough there. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that was amazing. And one of my wife's really good friends, around that time was a nurse, and I thought, okay, that's interesting, a nurse, but she was part of the Tara, structure as well. Dietitian really important, in terms of the check-ins around their weight and just checking body fat and all of those things. I think was quite an important one. Which I would have never thought of. You mentioned psychiatrists. I love that aspect with that. But just showing that, as you said, it's like multifaceted, and you need that full team to be able to, do that. The other point I thought was really fascinating was, the nurse would almost, especially in a structured program, they would almost like watch the patient eat. And I'm like, wow, that's interesting. You almost like don't trust them enough that they're going to eat. So you almost like, as a parent, you want to watch them eat, and you want to give them a certain time frame where that the food is actually down and it's going to get absorbed in the body. I would have never thought that. And again, if you're not used to thinking in that way, you don't think about it. But that was pretty interesting for me.
Yes.
That there's actually people that do that, like as in the program. Which I thought was interesting. Do you find, I want to come to your book just now, because I think there's, I think healthcare practitioners should do a lot more of what you're doing in terms of coming out with books and things like that. But is there anything around eating disorders that you think, I should have asked you that we didn't? I know we came up with an outline around this, but is there anything that we probably missed around the topic?
Just how pervasive it is, how sub-threshold. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is that a lot of people have problems with food, but it's not diagnosable in terms of you meet the DSM criteria, therefore you have an eating disorder. A lot of people, you miss one criteria, I can't diagnose you, but you sub-threshold. So you do have aspects of it, elements of it. And it is causing enough distress. But because of the DSM, I can't diagnose you with that. And that's something that is so prevalent in today's society, especially with COVID. How many people at the beginning of the lockdown were baking banana breads? And we all went, oh, put on so much weight and all of that kind of stuff. So all of those things. And when we think about eating disorder, we always think about thin, we always think about bulimia. We forget about binging. We forget about obesity. We forget all about those kind of things. And why did we all eat when we went into lockdown?
Because to cope with the stress.
We're bored, stress, everything. Yeah. That's the thing that I want people to kind of recognize. It's not just a disorder. We all have, in some form or another, issues with food. And at the end of the day, as I've been kind of saying, balance. I
like what you're saying, and I think spoken like a true psychologist, but it's like I think when these things are happening, you almost like need to look at yourself and say, Like, why am I binging? What am I missing? Why am I doing this? And I think sometimes we lose track of that. And you're asking some really interesting questions, but it's interesting questions that people listening to this, or anyone should be actually directing to themselves and saying, why did I bake loaves of banana bread? Why did I binge eat when lockdown happened? And I think that's the role in society, for professionals like yourself, is to help us navigate through that stuff, because we almost like life just happens and we just do things. But as you said, it happens for a reason, and you need to almost like find out what the reason is. I like what you said as well, in terms of it's not the extremes. It's almost like you need to watch for the the middle of the road aspects, I suppose. That happens, which is quite which is quite interesting. But I think you covered this, but I want to go back to that part of around body image, and for us to be quite clear about that. So how do we help people almost maintain a good sense of body image? And I'm thinking about teenagers. I think you said you mentioned modeling. Is there anything around that part that you think we can emphasize better?
I know this sounds very cliche, but self-love. Simple,
I like that.
but complex.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've used this example so many times now, and I can't remember in which episodes, but I always say, like when you look at yourself in the mirror, some of the things that we tell ourselves when we look at that person, we probably don't tell anyone else. And I just think about, anorexics or people struggling with an eating disorder. When they look at the mirror, what are they looking back at? And the other thing I remember is there's this image of this mouse, cat, and it's looking at the reflection and it sees the lion.
Yes.
And when you say self-love, I always think of those two things, which is, one is very positive and the other one is, the more negative aspects. Is there anything else that reminds you of like body image and being better with yourself with that stuff?
Well, I think what you just said to me is very important. We are very negative with ourselves. If we start externalizing what you're actually saying in terms of negativity, and think about, would I say this to someone else? Probably it's no. And I'm going to ask you, so why are you saying it to yourself?
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's a
So
really interesting point. Yeah. And if someone is saying, but I am quite negative all the time with myself, would that be a cry for help to see someone like yourself?
definitely.
Okay.
So if it's more negative, so as humans, we've got the tendency to be more negative than positive. If the negativity is just too much or overwhelming, then seek help, because you need to start flipping that. You need to start looking at the positive. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, and I like I like that aspect of like knowing as well, and in doing something with it. I think because that's the part that we don't do really well too. So let's come to your book. I didn't even know about that, but I'm glad that you mentioned it. Was there a certain need? Firstly, tell us what the title is, and you mentioned it's something related to eating disorders, and in terms of, did you find there was something lacking in the market right now, except the DSM-5, which obviously no one reads, no one non-healthcare practitioner related.
So for me, it's called Weigh the Feels. It's about to come out. I'm going to be putting it into publishing within the next week or two. And it's a holistic way of looking at food. So I talk about what we spoke about today, looking at the whole aspects of food, so the biological, the psychological, and the social aspects of food, and just kind of showing people you don't have to be on a diet. You don't have to have an eating disorder to have this bad relationship with food. And in that, I talk about, all those aspects, and then also talk about how you can cope with it. So I got little experiential learning things in it, how to help yourself cope when you're avoiding, when you want to over control, things like that. I've also got recipes in it, which are healthy recipes, but also celebratory recipe. So the book actually ends with a recipe for a cake. And where I talk about, I have been on this journey, celebrate it, don't have the full cake, but have the slice, enjoy it. So it's that kind of thing. And I don't see that enough in the market. So if you look on the market, it's all about diets, it's all about eating disorders, and it's not the middle ground. It's the person that's finding difficulty to adjust, to adapt. And in that book, I'm trying to give skills so that people can just adapt, cope better.
I love that. I love that because I think there's lots of books on nutrition, but like what we covered in this episode, which I really resonate with, it's like that holistic view, of it, and it's that almost like the thinking part around it and being more conscious of things. And obviously we're highlighting the fact that if you don't have that balance, like in eating disorder is one of those things that could go wrong. But I like that. And food is such an important thing in our society, in our lives, and I think it even makes I think it makes people happy, most of the time. And I think having a good meal, it's always that all of that connotations has like happiness, associated with it. And I think if you could harness that in a healthy way, I think is a good thing.
Yes.
So yeah, really, I'm really glad to hear that. Will it be on Kindle and all of that stuff as well?
It's coming out in print first, and then I'm going to go for the e-print. But plans already are for the Kindle and all of those kind of things.
Okay. No, I'll definitely look out for it. And then yeah, and I think we'll keep in touch as well, and I'll put the details in the show notes. So I think as long when that's out, it'll be amazing to link to it. So yeah, and definitely read it out, like myself as well, and see, because I think it'll be something that we can definitely help our children with. So all good. Thanks very much for doing this, and thanks for the work that you do around that topic. I think there's more people needed like yourself, especially in the times that we're living in terms of a lot more awareness, a lot more social media, a lot more body image type discussions.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. As always, stay tuned and we'll speak to you in the next episode.